The same principles as for reconstructing manes apply to tails and forelocks. So now I will go very quickly through tails, forelocks, etc. without getting into details, just to show you the examples of the final results. Here there's so little contrast between the tail and the background that this actually is the best we could achieve after selecting the subject. So making a new layer below the horse, picking the brush, adjusting the brush size and angle, setting flow to 100%, rotating the brush to match the tail strand's direction, and stamping. Obviously using the color that we picked from the tail. Erasing unwanted parts, stamping a few more strands, adjusting the size and the angle of the brush every time as we want to avoid repeating patterns. Sometimes we need not only to rotate the brush but also to flip it. A lot of trials and errors, a lot of brush tip changes, but the result is pretty good. Now making a new layer above the horse, picking a very subtle, very fine brush tip. Now we will be adding only a few strands in a different color. Stamping a few darker strands on the layer above the tail. Now erasing unwanted parts, setting the eraser to a very low flow. Here I have 1%. Now I'm adding a few more strands of hair on the bottom side of the tail because it looks a bit chunky here. When we are finished with stamping, we can perform a standard noise and blur trick. And here we have a new tail. You may need to blend the original strands of hair with new ones using the hair group brush, painting on the mask, but in this particular case, it wasn't even needed. Forelock example. So here we have the forelock, and especially the end of the forelock would be very, very hard, if ever possible, to select because of the low contrast. So we ended up with something like this after the selection. I am using the gray, neutral gray background here for the purpose of this tutorial to make both darker and lighter hair visible. Now I'm erasing these few strands of hair from my selection, which aren't helpful at all, but might mess with our reconstruction. Making a new layer below the horse, picking the brush tip, picking the color from the mane, from the forelock, adjusting the size of the brush tip, the angle, maybe we need to flip it, and stamping in the place below the selected subject. Now we are making another layer. This one will be above the horse, picking a delicate brush tip, just looking like a strand of hair, and stamping on top with the darker color here. We are using a different color because the mane is black and white, if you know what I mean. So there are strands which are completely white, there are strands which are almost black. Now we are making another one, this time white one, and removing the very tips which actually don't match the whole character of the forelock here. Now we can adjust the layer opacity. We may do it sometimes when what we painted seems to be too bold, too contrasty. So we can always lower the layer opacity till the point that we see that it kind of blends better. Now whiskers. We often lose them when selecting the subject, and honestly, it's usually better to mask them out and repaint them rather than trying to select every single hair of the whiskers. Making new layer, picking the whiskers brush. It might be the brush tip that will allow you to stamp all whiskers in one go, or you might just use a few stamps. Stamping, lowering the layer opacity. We usually lower the layer opacity with whiskers because they are kind of translucent, and then erasing the unwanted parts. And that's it. Another method is painting the whiskers using the dynamic brush. With this brush, every stroke varies a little. It changes the angle and the length, but only slightly. Pick the size which is longer than whiskers that you want to paint. Rotate the canvas and paint the whiskers, rotating the canvas after each stroke a little. Then erase the ends that you don't need. And obviously, you might also perform the noise blur trick on the whiskers, as well as on the forelock and on any reconstructed hair. And the last method, probably my favorite, is just to use a single hairbrush, which is a very thin round brush. Set the flow to around 50-60. If you are using a tablet, click this little pressure sensitivity icon, rotate your canvas so your hand movements are more natural, and just simply draw by hand the whiskers in the places you want. This method requires a little more experience and a drawing tablet, because it is really hard to draw whiskers using a mouse only. Plus, it is better when your drawing tool is pressure sensitive, so the whiskers endings are finer and thinner than the roots. To stamp back the belly fluff, use one of the brushes, which is called a top neck stamp, because it's basically the same, just reversed direction. So if you rotate it or flip it, you will get the direction of fluff like you need on the belly. It's really easy. It's just one stamp on one layer because there are usually not much details in this fluff anyway. You have a brush dedicated to stamp back under chin fluff, but my favorite method is using a coat hair brush. It's a dynamic brush, and look how beautifully it works. It just generates the strands of hair that vary a little in direction and in size. Adjust the size, rotate the canvas or the brush tip so you match the desired direction, and just paint the fluff. You can also use it for belly fluff and ear fluff. There's a few brushes like this in my set. They are similar, they just vary in softness of the fluff, so find the one that is right for your horse.